thoughts and my desires. A stranger, I have no one to unload on him my thoughts so true. The people do not like my roots, nor do they understand my end. In craze arise the multitude, in maddening noise without an end, and I remain in solitude, serenity in my heart felt. A stranger, I can find no home, nor a corner to rest alone. I cast away the world's pleasures, ignoring her callings to me. I dragged away my things, away from their merry makers. My heart silent, indifferent to all they think is important. My listening will never yield to loud and worldly conversing. I wander off all on my own, so happy to be in the vast, with my timbrel and my cymbal, and melodies of praise I sing. And now comes the holy moment in which I retreat with my King. I roam about as a spirit, invisible to onlookers. The world alien, I am to it, a foreigner like my forefathers. My existence is a triumph, no world's power to disturb me. No house is here to delay me, nor any friend or family. And with me are the sweet verses and great proverbs to console me. Will hear my only lamp, and nothing else to concern me. The Bible here my only lamp, and nothing else to concern me. I do not know of any fee, nor any bonds that hinder me. No longer does the world rule me, against me and at times for me. No longer does the world rule me, against me and at times for me. I say to every enemy who only wants to seduce me, beware that now I am alive, a stranger as were my fathers. I say to every enemy who only wants to seduce me, beware that now I am alive, a stranger as were my fathers. All right. Oh, there's heaps of recordings of it. Just go onto SoundCloud, YouTube, anything. You'll find heaps. Mm, it does. I agree. But, we try. All right, guys. So, this guy sits for the entire thing, nice and silent. It's probably around his sleep time, so we probably won't be very long. Here we go. Speak of the devil. So, actually, you know what? I might just, as we're talking, um, I thought the only way that I could do this is A, if I have something previously prepared, or B, if there's something that I wanted to revise. That's fine. Okay. That's fine. If that I wanted to revise. So this talk, I'm revising something that I did about 3 or 4 months ago, which was a course in the theological college called Youth Ministry. It was on youth ministry, and it was a summer intensive, essentially. It was run by Abuna Michael Salib, who's a priest out in Melbourne. He's really, really good. Really into his research and stuff like that, and he'd done a really, really good job. It was just 3 days that we did over there, and it's intensive, and then we have a whole bunch of assignments that we're doing about it now. But it was really, really informative 3 days. It's all about youth ministry and how to really serve these children better. So he really started from the beginning. He started with how these kids view religion, what influences their religiosity, if we can use that word, or religiousness, what makes them more religious or more spiritual, and how we can influence that and how we can nurture that and nourish that. And then he went into like the child developmental stages and what they're actually looking for, like identity and belonging and all. It was just really, really informative 3 days. Very intense, but very informative 3 days. This is only a very small portion of that course. And it's just really one concept. One of the readings that he sent to us was about this project called the NSYR project, okay, the National Study of Youth Religiousness, okay, project. This was done in America. Before I start, actually, this is good. I reminded myself. I thought I'd put this in here. Before I start, this is a lot of what I'm going to say today is research-based. Okay, there's just a lot of research, and it's very interesting research. Okay, but Abuna Michael started his lecture off this way, and I think it's really, really important because there's like 3 legs to this whole scenario. There's what we believe, okay, what we believe as the Coptic Orthodox Church and what we believe in, and we believe in the Bible and stuff like that. There's on-the-ground context, which essentially means that every single one of you guys is going to have a different experience of this, okay? And then there's the research, okay? And all of that combines together to then deal with the child, teenager, young adult, adolescent, whatever you're going through, okay? So just keep that in mind as we're talking about everything, because we're going to be heavily focused on that bottom left part today, that research section, because I think this research is really interesting, and I think every parent in the world should be informed of it at least once in their lives. But just keep in mind that it's a research project. Your child doesn't necessarily have to fit in exactly into this, okay? And I realize I am probably the least experienced parent here. See, this guy's only 4 months old. So I actually wanted to take a little bit of a survey, and it's actually a very small group, which is much better. Children, like, are we all parents here, firstly? Yeah, all parents? All right. Now, children between the age of 0 and 10, put your hands up. 0 and 10, okay. Later towards the 10, or maybe we just go around. 10? How old are your kids? Yeah. Okay. 4. Yep. Okay. That's okay. Yeah. Yeah, when you have 4, it's easy to forget at least one of them, yeah. Yeah. 9 and 4. That's good. You're gonna love this talk. You're gonna love these. You're gonna love these statistics. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it's gonna be a wide range of stuff. 8. You have 8 children. Wow. Okay. 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 Wow. Okay. The most experienced, but I feel like she should be giving the talk today, not me. You have a lot more to say about this than me. So you're on probably the later end of the scale, which is really, really interesting. All we're going to be talking today is sort of like what forms those later years, and maybe you can confirm tonight. It'll be good. At the back, 4-year-old, 6-year-old. Good, good. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is a little bit older, but it's good that you'll hear it now at least once. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Keep it in mind. At the back, 14, 8, and 7. Perfect. You 14 is the perfect age to be listening to this right now. You look after 11 children. Okay, is that like part of work? Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. Wow, I'm hearing a lot of teenagers. There's a lot of teenagers in that mix. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a tough age. And you have a lot of them. Yeah, God bless you guys. That's amazing. So we have people that are caring for 11 people, caring for 8 children, 4 children. I, yeah, that's fine. So if you're getting your name, forgetting the kids' names, it's normal. So yeah, I feel like I'm very inexperienced giving this talk. At the back, 3, 10, 6, and 1. Perfect. Also a perfect age to listen to all this stuff. All right. Yes. Yes. No. Great. Yeah. 2-year-old. And 4, 5, and 9. Amazing. All right. So we've got a range. Yeah. We've got a range of kids. Are you going to be okay? Good. I think that I was going to, I don't think I can change the slide. Sally had commented on this. Yeah. Let me get rid of this first. Sally's not there. I have to work you. You on this side? Yeah. All right. We'll go that way. I might. Thanks, Dominic. All right. So, um, lovely. So we have a very wide range of people. Now, this project, okay, um, it had 3,370 participants, all right? 3,370. It was a multi-million dollar project. It was huge, okay? And it's actually just coming to an end, which is why we're just starting to see. Actually, it's been quite a lot of books written about it, but we're really starting to see the research out of the later stages of the research come out, which is really exciting, okay? The survey interview covered many topics. So essentially what they did, they got these 3,370 participants. In the beginning, they were between the ages of 10 and 17, I believe, okay? And then they interviewed them over 4 waves, okay? So there's wave 1, wave 2, 3, and 4, all the way from 10 to 17 to the early 20s, okay? So a big sort of project over many, many years. I think it started in 2000 and ended in 2020 something, okay? It was just a lot of research, a lot of money got put into this, and it was incredible, the stuff that came. So they interviewed kids and their parents, okay, in the first wave. They interviewed the kids again in the second wave. Obviously, the numbers got reduced like with each wave, but when you start with 3,370, you're doing well, okay? So you're able to get a good pool at the end, all right? So the survey that they did, the interview covered many topics in addition to religiosity, including educational history and aspirations, changes in household composition, dating history, family, friendship, relationships, exposure to media, morality and ethics, extracurricular activities, and attitudes and behaviors. The average time for each interview was about an hour, okay? So imagine the amount of hours that was put into this. It was incredible, huge, okay? Really big project. The first wave, participants were aged between 13 to 17, and their parents were interviewed at the same time. Second wave, the respondents were between the ages of 16 and 21. The third wave, they were 18 to 24, and the fourth wave, 23 to 28. So they really followed them up. And they started asking them questions about all of the stuff we were talking about before. And then they did something really incredible. They developed 5 dimensions of what they called religiosity. They needed a scale, essentially. They wanted to see how religious they were, or how religious some of them were in the earlier stages, in the first wave, and how they were at the end. So they needed a scale to test how religious they were or how spiritual they were. And so they came up with these 5 dimensions of religiosity, which is really great. This is all the kind of data stuff, so I'm going to skip over it very quickly. Religious beliefs, so that was just the acceptance of a standard set of religious beliefs, such as God, like there is a God, there's an afterlife, there's supernatural, etc., etc. Religious exclusivity, which focused on the concepts such as orthodoxy or dogmatism beyond whether one holds a particular religious beliefs to a more global belief in absolutes, so not just like, are you a Christian, but do you believe in God, essentially, if you can think about it like that. The third one was external practice, so actually attending religious services, okay, religious service attendance, group membership like youth groups and stuff, social activities, do you go out and do stuff like that? Personal practice, that's like your personal prayer life, like your personal stuff, they asked them about that. Emphasize the means of a personal connection to the sacred and involves religious behaviors, usually done on one's own. And then religious salience is a representation of the place in one's hierarchy of identities that religion holds. Essentially, how important religiousness is to that individual themselves, okay? So they created this scale, and they created it as a scale, like they gave numbers and done a whole bunch of stuff. They created a scale out of like, I think it was 10 or something like that. And so they then compared the results of the first wave, the participants in the first wave, and the participants at the fourth wave. They're the same participants, but they just had a very long time between them. And then they discovered that there were 6 major sort of trends that happened. Either you were high stable, which is that solid line at the top, which is you started off high, you started off as quite spiritual, high on that religiousness scale out of 12, okay? You're sitting around that 10 mark, and then you stayed that way pretty much. You had a little bit of a dip in your 20s, and then you stayed there, okay? Then, if you go all the way to the bottom, there's the ones that started off very unreligious, okay? By the way, this was a survey of random people. Like, it wasn't just a Christian sort of based thing, it was just random people. So that bottom sort of light fainted line, you started off low, and then looks like you ended up a little bit lower than where you even started, okay? But you were pretty low to begin with. Then you have the 4 that's in the middle, whereas one of them is the steep decline, where you started off very religious and you ended up very unreligious, okay? Then you have those that started off a bit religious and then sort of fit somewhere in the middle. They called them the shallow decline. Then you had the ones that started quite low and ended up really high. Those were the steep incline. And then the ones that were the shallow incline, which is essentially, what do they call it? Where is that? There was a steep incline, and then it was the moderate shallow incline, which is, yeah, it's hard. Let me see. I know. Oh. No, not working. That's fine. Either way, so you have essentially like people that stayed religious and were very religious to begin with. Then you had the ones that were not so religious, stayed not religious. And in between, you had like 4 categories. People that started off religious went down. People that started off religious ended up in the middle. And then people that started off low and ended up high, or started off low and then ended up somewhere in the middle. And they found that these 6 trends, usually, if you take any participant out, all right. So yeah, if you take any of the participants, you'll find them sitting on one of these trajectories, essentially. And then they went even further. They said, what makes somebody fall into one of these trajectories? Okay? What factors can we pull out? What factors can we pull out that actually determine whether somebody is going to do these different, or sit on one of these things? Okay? This is just the characteristics of each of the categories. So the high stable, they started off attending church once a week, faith is very important, prays about once a day, and ended up also attends church once a week. Faith is extremely important, prays about once a day, same sort of thing. But the middle ones, the shallow decline, they attended church 2 to 3 times a month, and then they never attended church. They ended up in that really low category. Faith was very important to them in the beginning, but then faith was somewhat important at the end. And then praise a few times a week, went to praise a few, or kept it as praise a few times a week. It's just a very sort of in the middle kind of thing. So yeah, it's in the majority sort of sat. I'll tell you guys exactly where the majority sort of sat. Because there's the percentages there as well. So if you look, the high stable, which is very good, was 29% of those participants. The shallow decline was 25%. The steep decline was 13%. Thank God for that, because there wasn't very many of them. The steep incline was only 2%, which is a bit sad, but that's a whole different sort of category of people that and influencers that did that. Moderate to shallow incline was only 6%, and then the low decline was 25%. Okay. If we look here, this is sort of the. I'll send you these guys these slides as well, so you can zoom in and you can have a look properly. But the conclusion of all of that kind of graphs and whatever, because a lot of it is just statistics and stuff. There is an aggregate religious decline among emerging adults in our study. Emerging adults is those late teens to early 20s. They found that there is a sort of in-between category between adolescence and adulthood. That, like, it's in the Western society that when a child leaves school, they're not really an adult yet, but they're also not an adolescent, because they're in between uni and they change uni degrees and they do this and they do that. So this is just like phase from late teens to like mid-20s, where they weren't an adolescent and they weren't an adult. So they had to come up with something, and they called it emerging adults. Okay, it's actually only a Western thing. Very interestingly, in the sort of developing countries, that doesn't exist. Okay, because as if you know anything about Egypt, if you go to uni, you finish uni, you get married, you have kids. Like, it's just a very it's very clear stuff. But here, there's just too many options. So kids end up doing a billion things. It's so true, though. So they ended up with this emerging adults. So emerging adults, there is an aggregate religious decline among emerging adults in our study. So essentially, there is just a decline in religiousness across the board, okay? Which is sad. Then there's this. There is a group of young people who are gradually drifting away from religious communities and practices that no longer seem relevant for their lives. Okay, this is all, by the way, from the article themselves. This is quotes from the article. While a smaller group seem to have shifted away from religion in a more intentional and a decisive way. This is a bit interesting, okay? The smaller group that have left religion because of a more intentional, decisive way, probably had a situation that happened that like they experienced something negative and then they just stopped, okay? Like, it was just a situation that happened and then it went away. And that's only a small group. But they're gradually drifting away because it no longer seems relevant to their lives, okay? That's what we really want to focus on, because that is like the little silent killer, okay? That slowly, these kids were drifting away. It didn't happen all of a sudden. It didn't happen because of any specific situation or anybody that hurt them or anything like that, but it just happened naturally, which is very, very scary that can happen, okay? Stepping back for a moment, it's worth noting how little drastic religion change occurs for most young people. 4 of the groups, comprising 85% of all young people, show some sort of stability or incremental change that never exceeds more than 3 points in our scale. What they're saying is that most likely, if you were very religious, you probably stayed at religious. If you were moderately religious, you probably stayed at moderately religious. If you were not religious, you probably stayed at not religious. 85% of those cohort followed that kind of theme, okay? So it really matters how you were at a younger age, where you're going to end up. And that's not always the case. There's always differences. Another 15% of people of those kids that had a big drastic change between them. Okay, but the majority stayed where they were. Okay, which is very interesting as well. Yeah, went up to no, of the whole cohort. Only yeah, no, 85% were consistent. Yeah, yep. I don't think they had the exact number of that 15%, but in general, the whole cohort, only 2% ever had a very steep incline. Yeah, outwards, downwards, more than 3 points, okay, essentially, okay, on that 12-point scale, which is very interesting. So where you are, you most likely will you'll stay there, okay? Okay. Oh, you guys really can't see that now. Okay, so what they then did, okay, I'm just gonna explain it to you guys. What they then did was they said, very good, uh, was they said what kind of factors actually influenced this, this change, okay? What influenced them staying in the high religious side? What influenced them in staying in the low religious side? What influenced them in terms of changing, okay? And so they put all these categories. You can't see it there. I really wish I could actually try and get this zoomed in. Let's see if we can. I will. Exiting the slideshow is, yeah. Is that a bit better? Yeah, yeah. Let me explain. Let me explain. Let me explain. All right. Yeah. So, what this is saying, okay? What this is saying is that they took particular topics or particular trends. For example, this one was those who participated in religious mission trips as an adolescent. Okay? Those who went on a mission trip. You went on a mission trip. Okay. If you went on a mission trip, you were, oh, sorry, overall, that's the amount of people that were there. The high stable, the people that were stable in the beginning and ended up stable, that's the sort of percentage of people that they were in, the shallow decline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Can you see how that kind of works? Okay? You see how that kind of works? So as, like what we're trying to look for, okay, is that, is the factor, essentially what I'm trying to get to, is that factor going to keep me at that stable to high, all right, or that steep incline, essentially, yeah? Is that where I'm sitting, or what does this factor do? So for example, this factor we said that is that participant goes to on a religious mission trip, okay? Actually, there's not much difference in terms of the people that were stable high to the people that were steep decline, okay? Both went on religious mission trips, and both look like they're represented about equally in each group. Does that make sense? Okay, so it doesn't really make sense that that is a very effective tactic. All right, very effective way of trying to keep your child in church and trying to keep the religiousness of your child high. Okay, before we keep on going, okay, what do you think the biggest influences on a child staying in church and being higher on that religious scale? The floor is open. What do you think? What do you think are the biggest influences on a child growing up from teenager to adolescent to emerging adult to adult in keeping them high on that religiousness scale? Give me anything you think of. The home. Okay, home. As in parents, home. Good. What else? Friends at that age. Church. Very good. The location. Okay. The location of church or the location of the child? Yes. That was a very big factor as well. Things that are out of their control. Yeah. Somebody was saying. Yep. Whatever they see, whatever they do. Good. We'll talk about that as well towards the end as well. But you guys are right, okay? You guys are exactly right. So, if I can, I cannot see anything now. Here we go. All right, this one. This one here. Yeah, I think, no, it's because it's so I can see it, to be honest now, because I can't see it on here either. These ones is attending a religious youth group in an adolescent, okay? So people that go to the youth group, go to youth meeting at church or religiously, people that were stable high were highly represented, that was good, but also the shallow decline and also the steep decline, okay? And notice that the steep incline, those people that were actually went up, weren't represented very much there. So also, not something that really separates those groups up very much, okay? All right, let's have a look. So youth group, a little bit. Going on mission trips, not that much. Being very or extremely close to your parents, okay, by wave 4. Also, not that different. All those categories were quite close to your parents, okay? Notice the difference in language, okay? Just being close to your parents, okay? That didn't really make much of a difference. All of them were represented about equally in that, okay? Here we go. Yes? No, this is, they've said it here somewhere at the bottom. It's more of like a, raw percentage and adjusted percentage. It's a very complicated statistical thing that I'm not going to get into right now. Okay?
So what we're looking at here is overall, is that overall the percentage of
Yep, that's overall how many people. So for example,
so the dark line is the people who change?
yeah,
Like positive or negative changes? Is that
no, not necessarily. So remember how we're talking about those 5 categories and those, like those stable high and then those stable low, and those are the ones on the left. So those stable high, shallow decline, steep incline, and moderate incline, okay? So all of those. So we're trying to see, is the person that went to the mission trip, where does he fit on that scale? Okay, and they fit, because there's 3,000 and something. They fit. There's quite a few of them that fit in multiple different ones. Okay, so we want to try and find which factor really affects how these kids actually stayed, and it was different than the ones that didn't end up at church. Essentially, we want to see a big difference between the two. So far, what we've seen from all these factors hasn't been much difference. Okay, I'll explain to you when it gets to the ones that we want to talk about. It'll make more sense. Okay, all right. With parents who reported attending services with their teenager, so coming to the service with their teenager, we're starting to get a bit of a difference here. Stable high was very overrepresented here. So if you were attending services with a teenager, they are much more likely to be in that stable high category. Okay, and so that's getting a little bit better. This is where it gets really interesting. With parents who reported attending services weekly. So, church, coming to church liturgy, coming to, in their case, going to worship, going to whatever. Because they did this about like Protestants and Catholics and Anglicans, and like there was just a bunch of old things. So just any church service, okay, whether it was a liturgy, whether that was a service or like a meeting or whatever it was, anything, church service, okay. This is where it starts getting interesting. Parents who reported attending service weekly, not necessarily with their teenager, okay, just them, parents themselves attending services weekly, not necessarily with their teenager, became a little bit more distinct, okay. Careful because he vomits usually after he burps. I'm sure he has. That's right. Just keep this nice and close. It's good. Amuneg is regretting sending this message now. So, having yourself attend weekly services, not necessarily with your child, actually makes a big difference. The stable high are very represented here, okay? So are the steep incline people. Remember, we said there's only 2% of people that were steep incline, and they're quite over represented here. Okay? I like this one. This one's my favorite one. This is the last one I'm going to show you guys. Percentage of those who reported religious talk in the home a few times per week or more as a teenager. Look at that. Stable high, very overrepresented. Everything else, a lot lower. Okay? That one,
Stable high is the second
yeah.
line from.
It's 62 and 6, or I think that's 62 and 41. I'll
60%, 67%.
essentially, yeah, okay. What that's trying to say, essentially, what that whole thing is trying to say, okay, is that it's not just taking your kids to church. It is. Part of it is. Part of it is taking your kids to church. Part of it is coming with your kids to church and bringing them and attending services with them. But a lot of it is what you speak about at home. Okay? This was the conclusion that they wrote. This will make more sense because it's in words, not graphs. Okay, we can go back to the slideshow now, I think. Where is that now? It's gone. Here we go. Household religious factors, which is the ones that we're talking about in terms of whether the parent goes to church, whether the parent takes a teenager to church, whether the parent actually speaks the religiousness at home, speaks at least once or twice a week, has religious discussions, or speaks, doesn't even have to have religious discussions. The way that they talk is godly. Household religious factors appear to be most important for creating a context in which young people maintain religious engagement during their teen and emerging adult years. Having highly religious parents who are invested and active in the life of their teen is associated with a stable religious trajectory moving into adulthood. In particular, we found that, this is my favorite line, teens who reported regular discussions in the household about God, prayer, scripture, or other religious things are much more likely to stay religious themselves over time. We think this measure is likely capturing how faith is integrated into daily lives and routines in some households. The language that you use makes a big difference. So what they're saying, what they're really trying to represent when they're talking about the language thing is religiousness and God stopped once we leave church? Do we go to church and we talk about God and we give God that time when we're at church, but all other time, that's it. As soon as we leave the church, no more God talk. Or we're back to our normal lives. Or do we continue that? Do we continue that talk at home? And that's what they're talking about. Teens who reported regular discussions in the household about God, prayer, scripture, other religious things. Okay? This is, by the way, a Protestant funded religious study. Okay? So this is something that like they really invested a lot of time and energy and money and stuff, and they've come up with some very solid conclusions. Okay? The last line is actually a little bit funny. I just put that in there because I found that interesting. We found that those who ended up more religious by the fourth wave, and especially those who stayed religious throughout the years measured in the NSYR, were more likely to be married, college educated, close to their parents, and satisfied in life when they were asked. So it's very, very interesting as well. Okay. Why married? Good question. I don't think they've explored that yet. What they did try and start to explore is why parents. Okay. Ooh. We're good? Why parents? Okay. Very good. I like that. But so is other children. Other children at school are the same thing. They see them do. Like we were talking about monkey see, monkey do at the back. Same thing. Okay? They see you've seen, I'm sure every one of you has seen when their kids do something out of the normal and you're like, where did you pick that up from? And it's like your friend from school does it. Yeah? They've never seen their parents do that, but they've seen their friends do it. Okay? Media, social media, all that stuff, 100%. Okay? What they found was the reason why parents, firstly, time. Very simply, you spend more time with your children than anybody else. Anybody else. So if there was one person that was going to influence their kids the most, it's parents. Okay, 100%. No matter what you do, just the fact of being there. You know, I think it was either this study or another study, but it was mentioned in that course as well, that for the lack of one parent, okay, if by some sad thing the one of those parents was missing, you needed 5 adult mentors to equate to that one parent. One. So one parent, if there was one parent missing, for that child to still have a normal upbringing, to still sort of follow normal trends and stuff like that, they needed 5 adult mentors to replace that one parent. Incredible. What we play as parents on our children's life is incredible. Okay. The other thing is that most teens still look to their parents for guidance and help, contrary to popular belief. Okay. I'm not sure if this is an American thing only, but they mentioned that a lot of parents think that when they're in their teenage years, teenagers rebel, and it's a very hard time of life, and it's this and that, and it's just not really a time where any of them take any of the advice of their 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 um, their parents. But actually, they did studies and they found that no, actually teenagers are still very close to their parents, and it's more about guidance and help. And if they have any problems, they will still go to their parents for that. Okay. So that was the first question they asked: why parents? So it's first thing is time, and second thing is they still look to them for guidance and help. The first person that goes, yeah, of course, of course. Of course, there's many examples like that. But I think that, like, apart from those very far outliers, because I think they would be called outliers, that like extreme to the point where we're talking like abuse kind of way. Those are really really rare. Yeah, really rare and really outlier things. Most of them, and a lot of these, by the way, a lot of the stable high were coming from very conservative religions and very conservative communities. Okay, so it's not just it's not like yeah, it's interesting because the conservative ones are the ones that actually gave stability. Somebody told me this before, and I'll never forget it. That children like stability. Children like to know what to expect. But if you're up and down and you've changed your mind 100 times of how to raise a child, it's consistency. It's so important for a child even as young as 4 months old. Consistency is important, and for them to know what to expect is really important. One of the biggest things that he talked about was overrepresented in those low stages was parents that were religious themselves but didn't want to impose on their children their religiousness. Okay, they were like a lot more liberal. They were like, oh, look, this is what we believe in, but you make up your own mind. We're not going to influence your own stuff. So it's kind of like giving that child a lot of confusion. Okay, a lot of confusion. Whereas the ones that were really at a stable high were conservative religions that were told, like one of the conservative religions was Mormons. If you know anything about the Mormons, like they are strict. Like if you are a Mormon, if you're a proper Mormon, you after you finish year 12, you go for 2 years to a country that you don't know to do service, essentially. Yeah, I should not talk then. It is strict, right? It's very strict, it's very conservative, but that was effective. They kept their religiousness up throughout the rest of their lives into adulthood. Okay, it's because there was consistency, the stability, the stuff like that. We won't talk about the other stuff, but they had consistency and stability. If there's one thing that we can learn from them, okay? So that's why parents. Most time that you're going to speak, they gave a nice analogy. They said if your kid's time was like a big table, and all of these different things were coming to the table, like social media and friends and all this. Everyone wants a piece of the pie, okay? Everyone wants a little bit of your child's time. You have the biggest part of the pie. You have the biggest influence on that time. And what you do with that is really, really important, Okay? And then they said, why talk? Why is it that religious discussion makes such a big difference later in life when kids have graduated, possibly left home, married? Why? Why does having consistent religious talk that effective? And they talked about it in a really nice way. They said that religion is like a language. Okay, when you start to learn a language, okay, especially if it's a second language, you need as much practice as possible. Okay, if I wanted to learn French, for example, I would want to go and make friends with somebody who speaks French so that when they speak to me, I can practice my French. Okay? That's the same thing. If I want to learn that religious language, I need practice. I need to speak about it more often. If I only speak about religious stuff, if I only do godly talk, if we can talk about it as godly talk, if I only do godly talk on a Sunday without my parents, and then everything else is that's it, no more, throughout the week, I don't have enough practice. I don't have enough um, practice to be able to be fluent in that language. But if I am talking religiously and godly talk happens throughout my week, okay, then that makes it a lot more effective. I learn that language very young. I become proficient at that language. And then I carry that with me throughout my whole life. So they keep talking about why talk? Why is religious talk such an important thing? That's why. And when we talk about religious talk, guys, I'm not talking about sit down with your kids and do a Bible study every night, okay? Because they actually measured that, and that wasn't actually one of the things that were high. Doing a Bible study even once a week wasn't as effective, okay? What we're talking about when we're talking about religious talk is the language I use, even between me and my partner. How do I speak to my partner in front of my children and what they hear in front of them? Do I speak one way at church and then though I turn around throughout the week and then I speak a completely different way? Because they see that. They see that discrepancy. They see what happens between them. Is the way that I express myself when I'm angry or when I'm annoyed, is that religious? Is that godly? Or am I carrying on and swearing and this and that? And I come here on a Sunday and I'm praising. Again, it's that consistency. Kids thrive off consistency. If you're one way in the church, keep it going throughout the whole week. Yeah? So that's why talk and why parents. That is everything that I wanted to talk about. I'm sorry if there was a lot of confusion with the statistics and stuff like that. I will send you guys the slides so that you guys can um, uh, uh, analyze it a bit more. I will also send you guys a talk by the man who actually conducted or was at the helm of this whole study, this NSYR study. He has a talk called Parents, the Real Pastors, okay? As in like pastor, as in like the priest. It's like parents are the real pastors. Parents are the real influence on my children, not youth pastors, not youth ministers, not any of that. It's the parents, okay? And he goes through a lot of the statistics and stuff like that. He says it a lot better than me, and you'll get lost in his talk 100 times. But it's his name is Christian something or other. I'll send it. I'll send it on the group chat. I'm with you guys on the group chat. I'll send it. It's a really interesting talk. Stick with it. I know there's a lot of statistics in there, but stick with it. You'll like it. Okay? You'll like it. Thank you guys, and sorry for all the confusion. Why do I study theology? Because I like it. um, you know, I've studied a degree, my degree for work. I'm studying a master's now in something completely different. But theology is the only thing that I actually wanted to study. like really had interest. And it just started, to be honest, with a subject that I really liked and a lecturer that I knew very well and I really liked. And that was it was the first subject I did was Introduction to the New Testament. Just really getting in depth about the New Testament, the authenticity of it, how to read it properly, doing something that they call exegesis, which is like reading the context of your the passage that you're writing on before, after it, the literary techniques that they use in it, just really in depth. Reading the same story across the four Bibles, all that kind of stuff. Really, really interesting stuff. And that, to be honest, I don't know, that's not everyone's cup of tea, but I found that really, really interesting. But St. Cyril's, so we have a Coptic Orthodox Theological College. It's in Carlton, but you can do all of it online as well. And there are many, many different subjects you can do on there. I encourage you all, if you ever have any inclination to do it, to pick it up. It's not because I like studying, and I'm not a theologian by any means, I promise you. I just like learning more about that stuff and getting a little bit more in depth. And so yeah, I started there, and it's just I've done. That was my fourth subject that I did with them. Oh, beautiful. So that was something that they talked about as well. Like they talked about St. Paul's eschatology, and all that stuff. So you'll really love it. You'll love it if you go and attend. You can even attend as an auditor. You don't even have to do any of the assignments and stuff like that. I find it really really effective to do the assignments because it helps you revise and really like sticks the information. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. You can do it both. You can do it both. Yeah. You can just auditor as in like you're just listening to the lectures and stuff like that, and you'll really enjoy it. So, but yeah, that's a really good thing. If you ever feel like doing it, you'll love it. Also, the dean of that theological college is one of Dan Fanus, who is incredibly smart. He's like got a PhD in theology and this and that, and he is running it very, very, very well. But yeah. Mm. They start, I think, every single subject I've had, they've started by saying that A, there is no heretical questions here. Okay, as in like you can ask any question you want, and you're not a heresy, you're not saying a heresy. You'll get excommunicated, exactly. Even if you have an opinion that's different to somebody else, that's fine. You can still have that opinion. But the other thing they say is that we're doing this so that we can get closer to God. Like this is essentially the thing of it. If you want to get closer to God, have more personal, and that's the way that you'd like to do, because there's many different ways. That's your kind of way. If you love eschatology and you love like learning about that kind of stuff, do it. Jump into it. You'll love it. You really, really love it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for bearing with me for so long. Oh, that one was finished. I finished most of them. I've got one more assignment to do, the youth ministry one, and that's it. It's semester. It works off semester, same as uni. Yeah, yeah. So 14 weeks. It's practice. To be honest, it's changed a lot of what I think about youth and my yeah, because my main thing I do is youth, so that's why I wanted to do it firstly, but it's changed so much of the way I think about it. It's really incredible. Sorry, there's apologetics. There is apologetics. I didn't do apologetics. Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's heaps. Yeah, yeah. They're incredible. With Lamin. So
That's
it's awesome.
amazing. That's amazing.
It's
I
a
must
big
say,
change.
my sister-in-law, my wife's sister, her name is Martina.
Martina.
Martina McKay.
Martina McKay.
I think she's casual there, so
Interesting.
she
No.
she was
Look,
there
I'm
for about
very
a
new
year.
still,
Oh,
so
really? Okay.
this is only my second term with them. So I probably haven't bumped into her since Big Store.
I think she was there for a year and a half and then
Oh,
resigned,
okay. So I
like
probably haven't seen her.
maybe even a month ago or something.
Oh, there you go.
But yeah, no, great talk, man. And
No, it's really interesting stuff.
definitely,
I
yeah.
hope I wish I had a little bit more time to prepare. I think I would have been a little bit more
It
coherent.
was excellent. It was excellent. It was very, very well
I
done.
feel like I was all over the shop.
Very well done. No,